So hello everyone, welcome to the Jardin de Luxembourg. I'll try and cover my microphone from the wind here. Not only is it sunny, but yeah, it's a little bit fresh, a little bit windy, a little bit cold. Hello Natalia, nice to see you there. Please do leave us comments as I'm walking through. Helps me remember that you're all there watching me. Nice to feel together with you guys. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to do today, to give you an idea of who I am. By the way, if anyone can just let me know that the sound is working, that would be fantastic. If you just let me give me an indication in the chat there, I'll do my best to keep it protected. So yeah, if you haven't met me before as such, I'm Will. I'm going to be working with Paris and Beyond tours for just to do a few little tours here and there. It should be going on YouTube. If that's Josephine or Ferret, should be going there fine. Looking like it's fine from my end. So yeah, I'm Will. I've been in this city for getting on for 10 years now. Arrived in the city without a word of French, and I've been a tour guide ever since the time that I first arrived. I'm also an architectural photographer in the city, but it's really the guiding that I love, particularly walking tours. As far as what I wanted to do with you today, as I say, we've got an hour before the lockdown hits here. I thought I would initially do a walking tour based on the Roaring 20s, Les Années Folles. And that is the kind of main content of what I wanted to give you today. We are walking from here in the 5th in the Luxembourg Gardens. We're going to be, sorry, the 6th, walking back over to the 5th to the Latin Quarter, where a lot of that goes on. But there's a lot of interesting things on the way there. So I'll point out some of the monuments, some of the spaces that we have here, some of the history as well, because obviously those artists, those writers, they're here because Paris is such a rich city. There's a fantastic amount going on here. As far as where we are here in the Jardin de Luxembourg, if I can just turn you around. So there we go. So the Jardin de Luxembourg, pointing you into the sun there, got this wonderful basin, is all based around the Palais de Luxembourg. Hello there from San Francisco. A little bit different over here. So the Palais Luxembourg, the Luxembourg Palace, this was built many centuries ago. This was built by the widow to the king, Mary de Medicis. Henry IV was the king at the time there. She actually spent a lot of her time with the king in the Palace of the Louvre. They're quite similar in some ways here, 3 levels to it. This beautiful palace here, the Louvre, sections of that were built up in the Paris Renaissance style, Parisian Renaissance style. She is of Italian origin though, she wanted to build up something a little bit different here. So this is in the Italian style, and one of the beautiful differences with the Italian style is of course you have to accompany it with some wonderful gardens. One of you there saying in the chat that you maybe remembered walking through this park, sorry for the roadworks there, but we have these wonderful gardens in the Luxembourg Palace everywhere around. Wonderful place to see. And to give you an idea of, to give you an idea of where we are, what's around here. Hello. It's a great way to get attention, to hold a selfie stick in Paris. To give you an idea of what's around here, so we're right on the cusp between the 5th and the 6th arrondissement. In fact, we're on the corner of the Latin Quarter. The Latin Quarter itself follows roughly those arrondissements. If you look on a map of Paris, it runs all the way over to another garden called the Jardin des Plantes, and all the way up to the river as well there. So that's the area that we're going to be walking around today. Just before I really get started on all of this, I can see we have a link in the chat there. So to do what we're doing today, for me personally, it takes an incredible amount. Let me just spin you. There we go. Wonderful. So what we're doing today takes an incredible amount of preparation, incredible amount of research, incredible amount of time. If you can help get the message out, if you can help share this with your friends, if you can like this, subscribe to us on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel as well, so there'll be some content on there that you probably won't want to miss. So do everything that you can if you would to subscribe in that. But there are also financial costs for us as well. The equipment that I'm using right now, subscription fees, everything to make sure this goes out smoothly on YouTube and Facebook. So if you are able, it would be wonderful if you could click that link in the chat and support us if you are able to, financially speaking. If this is going to cut into your coffee fund, into your latte fund, absolutely don't worry about it. We don't put any barriers up for any of our content. Please enjoy this, but as I say, do share this if you can. That would be fantastic. So let's turn you around again. Let's put you back into Jardin de Luxembourg. So nice busy day today, and I really I find this space here, it's talked a lot about by the artists of the writers that came to Paris in the 1920s. So the foreign writers that came here, I'll concentrate mainly on one of those writers today. A particular favourite of mine, this is Hemingway, of course. Now Hemingway, when we think of Hemingway coming to the city of Paris, we think of him coming here, spending his time partying, spending his time in the restaurants and the cafes and all of that. When he first came here, at 1922, he actually came here and he complains about his poverty more than anything. He writes about coming to these gardens here in a Moveable Feast in his memoirs, and I'd like to use some of his words to really explain what he thought of this space, what he saw in it. So, in a Moveable Feast, he would write, "You got very hungry when you did not eat enough in Paris, because all the bakery shops has such good things in the windows, and people ate outside at tables on the sidewalk. When you had given up journalism, explaining at home that you were lunching out with someone, the best place to go was the Luxembourg Gardens. There you could always go into the Luxembourg Museum, and the paintings were sharpened and clearer, the more beautiful, if you were belly empty, hollow hungry. I learned to understand Cézanne much better and to see truly how he made landscapes when I was hungry. I used to wonder if he were hungry too when he painted." So it's kind of amazing there to think of Hemingway actually struggling, coming to this space here just to avoid all the restaurants and the cafes, which today is quite remarkable, really, to think that all of these people here today really doing exactly the same thing, coming to the only space which is open to them. Now, as you walk through the gardens here, it's kind of funny, at the entrance here, can any of you guess what this funny thing is here? If I come a little bit closer here. Bonjour there, Lynn, nice to see you. You can reply in the chat. Can anyone work out what this funny thing here is? So this is a scales. There's actually 3 scales at the entrance to the Luxembourg Gardens here. There's another one just over here. We're going to walk through the trees in just a bit here. These scales have been here since the beginning of the 19th century, actually. There we go. She seems happy. So you can come to the Luxembourg Gardens, weigh yourself. Yeah, and I think about those writers coming here, seeing how many pounds that they've lost since they last ate their last proper meals. In fact, Hemingway himself, there's a funny story. Hemingway actually came to these gardens just a little further along this park. There's a fountain, many pigeons around here. Apparently Hemingway would come to the city, would come into the Luxembourg Gardens. He'd smuggle some kernels of corn in his pockets, and he'd make sure there were no police looking, no gendarme around. Throw the kernels of corn down on the ground, wait for the pigeons to come in, and jump on the pigeons, wring their necks. And he would come here with his baby, Jack, Bumby as he used to call his baby there. There we go, lovely. So he'd come here with his baby Jack, with that chicken. He'd slide the chicken's corp just into. They've closed the gates on me. Oh, not to worry, we're going to go back the other way. It's okay, we've got the time. Let's walk back this way. So he'd slip the dead chicken into the pram of his beautiful baby to take it home for the family pot. Apparently the Hemingway family, him and Hadley Richardson, they'd eat so many pigeons that they got sick of eating pigeon. It's kind of a funny story to imagine him coming here. He does have a brutal side, after all. That is Hemingway for me. The other writer as well that I will concentrate a little bit on today is George Orwell, Eric Blair as he was initially named. So George Orwell also came here for very, very similar reasons. Turn you back around just to see. There we go. Beautiful avenues of trees here. So George Orwell would actually come here. He wrote a book, Down and Out in Paris and London. And in Down and Out in Paris and London, despite coming from a very wealthy background, he came here and lived poverty as a writer. Okay, he wrote in Down and Out. He wrote, every day at mealtimes you go out, ostensibly to a restaurant, and loaf half an hour in the Luxembourg Gardens, watching the pigeons. Pigeons that escaped Hemingway. Afterwards, you smuggle your food home in your pockets. Your food is bread and margarine, or bread and wine, and the nature of the food is governed by lies. You have to re-buy rye bread instead of household bread, because rye loaves, though dearer, are round and can be smuggled in pockets. So it's quite funny there to think of these two writers there, really struggling in their art, really struggling to make the money that they need to enjoy themselves in this city, to enjoy themselves in this wonderful city of light, of these crazy parties and the like. But there we go. Now, these two artists, though they may have come to the Luxembourg Gardens, were going to retrace their steps back home. Okay, so in fact, they lived, let's say, a quarter of a mile in the distance here. I'm going to take my care as I cross here. Do you forgive me a second if we have someone playing piano for you if you'd like to see. Just give you a second to enjoy this. The soul is not lost in this city. A wonderful sight, isn't it? I'm going to take advantage and cross the road while it is safe. Not sure if you can quite still hear that, but an amazing sight in this town. So as I say here, we're actually retracing our steps, retracing the steps of those writers, Hemingway and Orwell. We're going to go back towards their neighbourhoods in the city. And just cross through here. I'll spin. And as I say, I was intending to make this entirely a literary tour. But as we work our way just up to the top of the hill, a space where those two artists spent a great deal of time, you'll see there's an amazing building right at the end of this street. So this here is the Pantheon. Okay, the Pantheon is a building that was built a couple of years after the time of the French Revolution, 1790. This came into the city. Initially a church. It's changed since then. In fact, when we talk of Pantheon, there are two types of Pantheon as such. The one that we have here, looking in front of us here, this is a Pantheon. This is a necropolis where we have many important French figures buried. We have a few writers in this Pantheon. We have Émile Zola. If any of you are into French literature, Émile Zola. Also Victor Hugo, very important. And I definitely agree, Lynn, very much a must-see. For me, I have to say it's a little bit, hasn't quite got the same soul as a living church as such, but very, very impressive building. And in fact, as we walk up the street here, bonjour Glenn. As we walk up this street here, actually, it's nice to remember we had another building which resembled this, which looked very, very similar almost 2,000 years ago. Actually, where I'm walking right now, we had one of the most important Roman structures. We had something called the Forum. So the Forum was a big shopping centre almost. The Forum had a temple which looked almost identical to the lower section of that Pantheon. So we had big columns, the podium on the top of it. There was a temple right where I am now. And then as we were walking up, a little bit in front of me, we also had a basilica, so the more kind of administrative section and all of that. So if any of you would like to see any of that, just behind me, we actually just have a It's not very glamorous. It's not the most dramatic entrance in the city. We have a parking down there. You can actually go underneath into that parking and find some of the remains of that forum. In any case, the Pantheon as we have it here, you may not quite be able to see this on the stream, but I will read for you the inscription, which is just above those Corinthian columns there. Aux grands hommes, la patrie reconnaissante. So to great men, the nation is grateful as such. So obviously as I say, we have 78 figures, dramatically important to French history, buried in there. In fact, nowadays to be buried in the Pantheon, they have to pass an act of parliament to get you in there. It is quite a macho institution, I'll be honest there. Feel free in the comments if any of you can guess how many women we have in the Pantheon. How many women do we think would be in this Pantheon? In this great state of equality, of liberty, of all of that. If any of you can put that in the comments, how many women in there? So as I say, Émile Zola and Victor Hugo are in the crypt there. Victor Hugo did a great deal to protect some of the history of this city, as we'll find out in just a moment. We also have Madame Curie. There we go, Lynn, you're right on the money there. So, we have Madame Curie indeed in the Pantheon. We have her husband as well. Of course, Madame Curie did much of the research. Fairly close to my heart, Madame Curie. She's of course of Polish origin, as is my wife. Let's just spin you around. It's an amazing square. Let me drop this for a second as I'm all by myself. So yes, Madame Curie, it was her husband who had the privilege of coming to the Pantheon in the beginning of the 20th century. Although they worked alongside each other and she would only simply need the space to lie alongside her husband, she was not allowed in here until the 1990s. Quite incredible there. So yeah, the 1990s. There are a few women in there, so there is not only her, there's actually 4 others. So 5 out of 78. France has got a little way to go here on that, but there you go. And I think you may even be able to see just over my shoulder, it's a little thing here about Victor Hugo. So it is well worth coming into, well worth seeing. I'll just flick you, there we go. We have another in this Place de Pantheon. We have another building here, the Faculté de Droit. So the building's looking all around onto the Place de Pantheon. In front of us additionally is a library. And we're actually surrounded by many students. Okay, you can see they're all very, very young people enjoying their time here in the city. So the Sorbonne University wraps around the Pantheon, really everything out to the left-hand side over here. Beautiful church in the distance, which we'll come to in a second. Sorbonne University has an amazing history to it. It was first connected to the Notre Dame. So Notre Dame 1163, that was initially built up. And the Sorbonne dates back all the way back to an ecclesiastical school in that time. The official Sorbonne University officially was inaugurated in the 13th century, making it one of the oldest universities in the in Europe, in the top 10 for sure. Interesting as well to note, it is thanks to that university, thanks to the language of that university, after all, that we call this the Latin Quarter. Okay, so because many of the first students came here undertaking religious studies, Latin became the lingua franca, if you like, of these student bodies. It also allowed for a fantastic exchange as well between nations. Isn't that just wonderful in the sun there, that facade looking west? So yes, Latin was of course the language of this space. Now, the church which is in front of us, hope you're enjoying yourselves sitting safely wherever you are. I'm huffing and puffing a little bit walking up the hill. The hill here is a hill called Saint-Geneviève. And on the top of this hill here, very interested to see if any of you will guess as to why I have brought you here. So, Sainte-Geneviève is the patron saint of Paris. She was around in the 5th century, and at the time of Attila the Hun, when those armies all the way from China ravaged Europe, she actually brought the city together, brought them into prayer, and she saved the city, those armies stopping, give you a good look up and down, those armies stopping less than 100 miles away from Paris. So, she convinced the king to build a church, which would later be a nunnery, which is just over here. This is the Lycée Henri IV. It's mentioned quite heavily in many of the books from the writers of the 1920s. But she had a church built here, very important, just take my care crossing the road here, a very important religious space here. But the reason, in fact, that I've taken you to this part of the city is because of a film. Okay? So as we just walk through here, if any of you have the chance to visit inside Sainte-Geneviève, it's a remarkable interior in there, but the reason I'm taking you around here is for a film. So 2012, Woody Allen, I'm not sure, so in the chat, feel free anyone, would anyone amongst you say that these steps on the right hand side here look familiar? So how are we doing there? Any thoughts on those steps there? So the reason that I brought you here, of course, really the best resource if you're ever thinking to really capture the atmosphere, the spirit of Paris in the 1920s, is of course Midnight in Paris. Okay, so any of you, there we go, again perfectly on the money, Lynn. I'm very, very impressed with. So let me just drop this for a second. Yes, indeed. So, A Midnight in Paris, film there. For any of you that may not have seen it, the film is really based on a character who is a screenwriter, successful screenwriter in LA, I believe, comes here with his fiancée and visits the city, but wants to avoid the parties. Ironically, wants to avoid the parties. Slinks out one night by himself, and on these steps just behind me here sits down as on midnight the bell tolls just above us here, chugging up the hill, which is just, let's see, just behind here. Okay, not quite so romantic as in the film. The Croix Rouge, the Red Cross. Chugging up the street here was a Citroen from the 1920s. He's beckoned in by a group of Americans, and that is his portal to go into the world of the 1920s. I think in the film he ends up just a little way down into the center of the city. He ends up on one of the islands, walks into a party where Cole Porter is playing on the piano. He's surrounded by the Fitzgeralds, Zelda, and the like. So if you do want to kind of capture the idea, capture the kind of atmosphere of that 1920s Paris, do go and see that film by Woody Allen. It's a little bit cliche, I have to admit. Let's walk here around the side here. We're going to walk back into the sun, I think. It's a little bit cliche. I understand some of you may be having problems connecting to this today. I hope you've made the connection. So we're up at the top of the Mont Sainte-Geneviève, the amazing Saint-Étienne-du-Mont. Paris, you can think of it as a city which is based around the islands, but we've got a series of hills around. There's another very famous hill with a church on the top of it. You may be able to. Hi there, Georgina. Wonderful to have you with us here today. Let's just flip you around for a second. So we have another very famous church on the top of the hill, the Sacré-Cœur on Montmartre. It's another worthwhile spot to see. So as we walk along here, we have the church on the left-hand side, Saint-Étienne-du-Mont. On the right-hand side, we have the Lycée Henri IV. So this is where the first nunnery was. It's a very important religious site, and we are getting very, very close here to some places that a whole number of the artists, the writers of the day, used to live in. Just a word about that community. The community of writers there in the 1920s, why did they come to Paris? So already for Europe, Paris was a centre of really the intelligentsia, a certain group of intellectuals, of artists, or the like. In very simple terms, for Americans, a very, very strong dollar after the First World War meant that they could come here and live very respectably on a very simple writer's income. So we had great numbers of them coming here, and there were two kind of centres there were two centres which kind of drew them in. Firstly, Shakespeare & Company. I would love to take you to the Shakespeare & Company. This may look like a rather nondescript road. I will just, to allude to this later on, the name of the road, Rue Descartes. We'll come back onto that in a little moment. So we had a very notable bookshop. We had an Anglophone bookshop here called the Shakespeare & Company. Hemingway apparently said he was their best. There's a nice street art there on the top. He apparently said, that he was their best customer. Sylvia Whitman was holding that together. Let's hear. And then we also have another centre. So Paris for many years had a kind of culture of salon. So we had notable intellectuals. In this case, in the 1920s, for the American expat community, we had Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein had in fact been in the city for quite a few years before. Just going to stop. There we go, wonderful. So Gertrude Stein had been in the city for many years before. She was also interested in art. Apparently she was one of the most prolific purchasers of Picasso's in the day when no one knew who she was. There's a very famous image of her slumped in a chair, painted by Picasso, if you want to visit the museums here. She was a great meeting point. She would allow the artists to come together. Hemingway saw her very much as a mother figure in those first few years. Although there's quite a strange antagonistic relationship between the two of them. Why have I brought you here? Because here, on the wall, we are in Rue Descartes. We have a plaque here, so I'm not sure if it's to front for you. Ernest Hemingway lived in this building from 1921 to 1925. Very, very few words on the plaque, and I'm afraid to say they are all incorrect. So Hemingway would arrive in the city in 1922. He comes here with his wife, and he spends the first few months with his wife in a hotel. In English, I'm very proud to say it's the Hotel on the north side of the city. So a little bit late. He did spend in time in this building here. So La Maison de Verlaine. Just spin you around. There we go. La Maison de Verlaine. Maybe crosses the road. Excusez-moi. La Maison de Verlaine. Verlaine is a very famous. Let's try and get this. Hope this is a little bit better for you. Verlaine is a very famous French poet, prolific around the turn of the century, around 1900. He would come to a hotel which was just sitting above the restaurant, which is behind me here, and I'm afraid to say this is the hotel in which he would pass away. Kind of incredible. He would pass away, and Hemingway, only living just a street over, he heard this, and of course this is exactly where he had to come to do some of his writing. So this, in fact, this is the address, a little way up on the top of this building. This is the address where he would write quite a few of his first works. He would write The Sun Also Rises, for example. He would write the very catchy 3 poems and 10 short stories. Incredible name for a Nobel-winning. He was a man of very few short-to-the-point words, but there you go. So he would start some of his major works in the space just behind us here. And it's kind of interesting. If I turn you around, so here we are at the top of a very important street. I hope the audio is a little better for some of you there. Hopefully we're in a quite confined street here. Should be a little bit clearer for you. So he writes about this street. He also writes about the space that he was living in as well. So he would say it was either 6 or 8 flights up to the top floor, and it was very cold, and I knew how much it would cost for a bundle of small twigs. 3 wire-wrapped packets of short half-pencil-length pieces of split pine to catch fire from the twigs. I thought about how the chimney would be cold and might not draw on the room, possibly filling with smoke, and the fuel wasted and the money gone with it, and I walked on in the rain. I walked down past the Lycée Henri IV and the ancient church of Saint-Étienne-du-Mont and the windswept Place du Pantheon. So we can really imagine him walking these streets here, moving between his studio, walking to catch some pigeons in the Jardin de Luxembourg. In fact, as we come down here to the square, glad to hear the sound is better for you there, Susan. Merci, merci. So as we come down to the square here, this is really the head of that the street, Place Contrescarpe. There we go. We usually would have a few more bars open here. This is not going to be the case today. He wrote about this space, in fact. Okay, so the head of the Rue Mouffetard, as we are now, he wrote about this place, and he wasn't the biggest fan of the bars here. Okay, as I say, he spent most of his time around Montparnasse. He wrote about a bar which is just where the police van is there, and he would say the Café des Amateurs was the cesspool of the Rue Mouffetard, that wonderful narrow crowded market street which led onto the Place Contrescarpe. It was a sad, evilly run café where the drunkards of the quarter crowded together, and I kept away from it because of the smell of dirty bodies and the sour smell of drunkenness. The men and women who frequented the Amateur stayed drunk all of the time, or all of the time they could afford it, mostly on wine which they bought by the half-litre. So quite something there. He paints a picture of this being actually quite run down in some ways. As I say, he will live on the Rue Mouffetard, just off the Rue Mouffetard, only for a few short months. But I will walk you through it. We are quite safe, don't worry. Many of these shops are closed, but you can see there are some interesting places to come here to eat. So Hemingway himself, he would live in this neighborhood here not very long. 1922. In 1923, he would actually leave Paris. His wife, Hadley Richardson, falls pregnant, and they decide to leave Paris, go back to North America to have their first son, Jack Bumby. Remember Jack from the Pigeons? But this street here, the Rue Mouffetard, is really one of his main stomping grounds. And these streets here were actually home to many immigrants, not just from the US, but from all parts of the world. In the 1920s, to give you an idea, we had an incredible 30,000 Americans alone in this city. 30,000 Americans living in this city. But as I say, there are people from all walks of life here. Now I want to show you just one little street here. If any of you can see the Invader, we'll come back to this. Can any of you see the Invader here? Okay, we'll come back to this in a minute. So this is the Rue Pot de Fer. The Rue Pot de Fer, Iron Pot Lane, which, if any of you read any of Eric Blair's writings, George Orwell's writings, lovely bit of sun coming down there. If any of you read George Orwell's writings, Down and Out in Paris and London, he writes about this space here. A little as we have nowadays, there's a few little restaurants. There's also a few hotels. So he was in fact living in a hotel which is just above us right now. Okay. And he writes some very, very nice passages from them. So, let's find... Let's see where we are. Here we go. Oh. Excuse me there. Here we go. So, the Rue Coq d'Or. It was a very narrow street, a ravine of tall leprous houses lurching towards one another in queer attitudes, as though they had all been frozen in the act of collapse. I don't know if you can see a very narrow street here, nothing like the haussmanized Paris that we see. Rue Soufflot, for example. Very, very strange. And he writes about the people that he met along here. So, the proprietor of the... And I love this very little exposed wooden... They actually made this illegal to put wood in the facades of the city, so we don't see very, very few facades like that. He wrote about the proprietor of the hotel that was in here. He says, Madame Montz, who kept the little hotel opposite mine, came out onto the pavement to address a lodger on the third floor. Her bare feet were stuck into sabots, and her grey hair was streaming down. Madame Montz, sacré salope, how many times have I told you not to squash the bed bugs on the wallpaper? Do you think you've bought the hotel, eh? Why can't you throw them out of the window like everyone else? So amazing, amazing communities, real stories of deprivation now. In fact, George Orwell, he did his first kind of reconnaissance missions. He spent a little over a year in London, down and out in the East End. He manages to get himself in such a situation he would go into the working houses of the day. He got himself locked up in the clink as well. And then he comes to Paris, spending 18 months or so. So he works with a lodger that was in the same hotel, Boris. He spends a little bit of time teaching English, loses that job, pawns away most of his clothes, and then spends most of his time as a plongeur in the city. Good to see you there, Lauren. A little bit late, don't worry, that's not a problem. Still got a little bit to go, don't worry. So he spends much of his time in the city actually as a plongeur, working in the hotels here, 13 hours a day washing dishes, and after 18 months of that we'll leave the city. But there we go. So if you do have a chance, definitely down and out in Paris and London does paint a wonderful picture of the city. Now we are retracing our steps here. Retracing our steps, we're going to go back up towards the Place Contrescarpe. It's wonderful to see so many people out on the streets, but here we go. So we came from the road on the left there, but in fact we are going to walk through another street. And this other street here, this is Rue Cardinal Lemoine. Rue Cardinal Lemoine. So Rue Cardinal Lemoine is just behind. Take care as I can. Rue Cardinal Lemoine is just behind the first writing studio of Hemingway. And as we turn the corner here, there we go. Number 74. So I don't know if you can see there, number 74. There we go. So number 74, fantastic. There's even a sign just above which gives you a clue, under Hemingway. We do have a plaque here with a few more words. Ernest Hemingway, 1889 to 1961, so that's his birth and death dates there. So Ernest Hemingway, he would come to this space here, as I say, first living in a hotel in the city. This was the first apartment that he was given. He paid only $1 a night to live at this address here. There was a bal musette, so the blue facade that you can see on the bottom left-hand side there. The bal musette there. There's many stories of Hadley Richardson and Hemingway dancing the night away there. He did say that sometimes that would turn a little bit violent, so he didn't spend too much time, as I say, preferring the bars over towards Saint-Germain area. But they were living in the 4th floor up on this property right here. And what's really interesting, I find, is the contrast between how he describes it and how his wife describes it, Hadley. So Hadley, she writes back to her mother and she begins, "Dear Mother," to Grace, "we have been having a wonderful time working out the possibilities of our new apartment, which is spacious and comfortable. I have my piano in what was the dining room, and the dining table is used as a work and writing table, as well as a meal table." So we have from that the idea they lived in a fairly confined space, as most Parisians do nowadays. If you're wondering why so many people are out on the streets, probably to get away from their small apartments, in all honesty. But she paints a really quite rosy picture of their first family home in this place here. If you compare that to what Hemingway writes about, so in A Moveable Feast, he would say, "Home in the Cardinal Lemoine was a 2-room flat that had no hot water, no inside toilet facilities except an antiseptic container, not uncomfortable to anyone who is used to a Michigan outhouse, with a fine view and a good mattress and springs for a comfortable bed on the floor, and pictures we liked on the walls. It was a cheerful, gay flat." It's a cheerful, gay flat. So, yeah, quite a there we go. So, quite a funny picture that they both paint there. See what he's writing about Paris, about his income, particularly when you think about what he was doing. He does have a tendency to exaggerate somehow on what he says his time in the city was. Interesting to think as well, for me, the most impressive work of his A Moveable Feast was actually written more than 2 decades after he left Paris. So he would eventually, after living here, he would move into the area around Montparnasse, near Saint-Germain. He would leave by the end of the 1920s. For many of the writers of the time, it was a Wall Street crash, actually, which finally meant that they didn't quite have the incomes on the same exchange rates to live here as they did before. So really by the 1930s, most of them had left, actually. I will just point out one thing on this this address here. There's a plaque. Gotta love the plaques in this area. So one plaque up here. Here lived René Descartes. René Descartes. So we have Descartes. If you remember the Latin, the language of this centre, which is really all based around the university, not far from the Sorbonne. I think, therefore, I am. This is where the philosopher René Descartes lived. As well as just a little way over the buildings behind here, we also had James Joyce. I spoke very briefly about the Shakespeare and Company being kind of a little oasis, a little heart for all of those writers that came here. In fact, it was the Shakespeare and Company here in France that published his book Ulysses. Paris was really a space of liberalism as much as anything else. For the US, many of the artists saw that as quite a conservative, obviously a deeply Protestant nation. They come to Paris to just have a little bit more freedom in what they express. This was the same reason, for example, for why George Orwell would write here himself. He could get away from those kind of suppressions. So quite an interesting rationale for some of them. It's not simply economics, it's not simply the community, but because of the kind of liberties that were so different, so unique to France nowadays, but also particularly so at that time. Now, we've seen one of these already. Do any of you notice something over my shoulder here? So if you're wondering what all of these little invaders are here, these little space invaders, I do love these. I particularly do love these. The Space Invaders of the city is a good excuse, something good to look at as you're coming through the city of Paris, looking on the city streets. Space Invader, the artist that creates these invaders here. Space Invader actually the man with no name, the man behind a mask. He's always representing himself behind a mask. He actually went to the École des Beaux-Arts. So talking about that kind of heart of intellectualism, I'll just take care on this street, risking my life for you guys. Space Invader actually went to the École des Beaux-Arts. That was set up by the Royal Academy. We had many important artists. You can see the Invader again there, just over my shoulder. Let's see if I can get in here. So we had many famous artists going through there. Delacroix, for example. If any of you have seen Lady Liberty guiding the people in the Louvre, perhaps. Paul Cézanne in the Orsay Museum. Paul Cézanne was not allowed into the École des Beaux-Arts, but Invader is. You may also have a chance as well to see. Let's see if I can get in here. It's just about closing time on these parks here. So yeah, Space Invader has many of those installations all over the world. If you're in New York, if you're in LA, if you're in Kathmandu in Nepal, you can see his little inscriptions there. And I'm going to turn you around for a second. This is quite an entrance that you've missed. There you'll see it. So just to finish off today, and I'm very happy to be in here because it's 14 minutes to, and this is supposed to close a minute ago, but this is France, so nothing runs on time. Now I thought I'd finish off this tour somewhere just a little bit different. Okay, now feel free in the chat. Does anyone know where I am here? Can anyone work out what this place is? So this is quite a funny space in the city here. There's some stands up there. Almost a bull ring, you could say. Good place to play football. And in fact, a little bit ago, there we go, fantastic. So a little while ago, as we walked out to the Luxembourg Gardens, I spoke a little bit about the Roman history of this city here. So the space that we're in here, I've got to say, I always think of Hemingway when I'm in here. So this is called the Arène de Paris, Arène de Lutèce, in fact. Lutetia is that old Roman name for the city. So the Arène de Lutèce is the old arena, okay? This is where gladiators would come. This is where there would be bullfights. There we go, Violetta, spot on. So this is where bullfights would go on. This is where there is a plaque, again, just in the distance, in front of the camera as such. There's a plaque saying that there were nautical games in here. They said that they flooded it, a bit like the amphitheatre in Rome. That is entirely inaccurate. Always take care when you read plaques in the city. This space here, what is amazing to me, this is actually a big enough space to initially welcome 17,000 people back at the time of the Romans here. There were only 10,000 people living in Paris. This was this place to be for everyone that lived all around the city. Why have I taken you here? What has this got to do with literature at all? I may think of Hemingway when I... Salut, hello. Why have I taken you here? Because this place exists here because of one of the most famous French writers. Okay, anyone who's read The Hunchback of Notre Dame, watched the fantastic Disney version of it maybe. My favourite version is the 1956 version, 53, 56. Victor Hugo, when he was writing about the Hunchback of Notre Dame, he was using it actually. He was part of an association that saves Notre Dame. Here we are saving Notre Dame now, 2 years after it caught ablaze. Now, in the middle of the 19th century, Victor Hugo saves Notre Dame. It was in very, very poor repair. He romanticizes this monument by writing about it, short stories in the right, and eventually coming out with there we go. Eventually coming out with the Hunchback of Notre Dame. This space here is a little less known, but the Arena of Lutèce, this was all uncovered in the middle of the 19th century, similar time when Haussmann was rebuilding everything. They disturb the site, they find these amazing ruins. There's the cages for the animals just down behind me over there. And he writes about this. He's part of the association. He eventually saves this monument here. thanks to what he would write about it. So yeah, if you're ever in this part of the city, it's a little bit different. I thought though I still wanted to close on this space. It's an amazing space to come. So yeah, there we go. Now, I'm afraid to say, I've come to the end of my little walk through the city. I think the security guards are probably going to throw me out if I stay here too much longer. I hope you've enjoyed this little walk through Paris. Afraid it couldn't be a little bit longer with the curfew, but hopefully you've seen some interesting things here. Before we finish up, the chat is still going here, so I'm going to stick online for a little bit longer. If any of you have questions, I'd love to respond to them. So just pop your questions in there. I'm going to stick around. I'd love to give you some answers on that. As far as the few writers that I've brought out today, it's really two for me, Hemingway and George Orwell. So we have A Moveable Feast is the memoir for Hemingway. The Sun Also Rises is an interesting kind of perspective on his first few years in the city, and then Down and Out in London and Paris. Do look at those as well. Ulysses from James Joyce is quite an interesting one, and then with this space here, of course, Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame, a little bit further out towards the centre of the city, but a classic read if you want to understand a little bit of the romance around the city. And don't forget to watch A Midnight in Paris. Before I sign off as such, a couple of other things. The next 2 weekends, so the next 2 Saturdays, we have got a few other things going on. Monet, if you're interested in Monet, Impressionism and all of that, Ferret will be talking a little bit about Monet. And I believe Ferret also will be doing a special cooking edition in a couple of weeks. I hope I've got that right. Feel free, Ferret or Josephine, to put something in the chat there. Maybe correct me. Put any links as well. But yeah, do go online. Do all of that. And just one last time, as I say, this is an entirely free-to-view event. If you can just share this with your friends if you enjoyed it. Share any links that you can. If you are able to contribute to this tour, just to keep us paying equipment costs, subscriptions, all of that, we would absolutely love a donation if that's not going to kind of cut into your coffee fund. As I say, this is entirely free to view. I'm just very happy that you could be here. So yeah, without further ado, thank you very, very much. I'm going to spend a minute or two just going through some of your comments here, seeing if there's any questions. Feel free to pose any questions. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Natalia. It's I'm over the moon just to have you all here. It's fantastic to see that. So how are we doing here? Cool. Just flip you around to see beautiful evening in the city here. Amazing space this. I can always imagine Hemingway coming in here thinking of the bulls. Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. Cheers, Atisha. Awesome. Yeah, do come back in next Saturday. We'll be talking about Monet and all of that. Sorry you started late there, Lisa. It's not a problem if you want to catch up on anything at the start. It'll all be online. You can go on our Facebook, you can go on our YouTube. It's all there. Cheers, Carol. Thank you. What a beautiful evening in the city. So yeah, there you have, there's a link to the YouTube if you want to watch this again from the start. Awesome, there we go. I think we're just letting the locking the animals up safely for the night. Okay. Cheers, Lisa. Great to see that. Okay, so if there's no further questions, I think I'll say goodbye. I'll sign out before I'm locked away here. Hope you all enjoyed it. Catch you all on another Saturday. Bye.